Hi guys, me again, finishing our book. And like I wrote in the email, today I'm going to finish this book up. You'll have something in your email to finish. This will be our last day for afternoon work. I will continue to read our new book every afternoon and post that for you guys, or mid-morning, whatever. And you can continue to watch that, but there's going to be no more afternoon work in reading. Everything will be in the morning. So it's in your afternoon email. I explained it in there. Okay, I hope you guys are all well and having a good day. It's nice out. It's hot. Anyway, here we go. We're going to finish this. Vampires don't wear polka dots. Let's see what happens. Chapter 11, No Ordinary Teacher. The third grade class gathered outside in their usual place under the big oak tree. Did you see what Mrs. Jeepers did to Eddie? Melody squealed. I couldn't believe it, Liza said. Are you okay, Eddie? What are you guys talking about? She didn't do anything to me all day. She let me get away with murder. Eddie, she hypnotized you and froze you like a popsicle. And you didn't even know it, Howie shouted. You guys are crazier than you look. Mrs. Jeepers is a wimp and I can prove it. Tomorrow I'll give her a day she'll never forget. Eddie, are you crazy? Howie asked. Mrs. Jeepers is a witch or a vampire or something. There is something that she is not telling us. There is no telling what she could do to you if she really gets mad. Mad, smad. Just wait until tomorrow. Mrs. Jeepers will run out of that room faster than you can say Transylvania. Eddie turned and stomped off. Melody looked at Howie. You know, maybe we should do something about Mrs. Jeepers. I mean, it is definitely not normal to hypnotize a student during math class. I know, agreed Howie, but who could we tell? Mr. Davis would probably laugh us right out of his office. Melody nodded her head. Either that or put us in the nut house. What about your parents? Would they believe you? Howie asked. No, my mom would just tell me to stop exaggerating and I'd probably get in trouble for telling lies about my teacher. Yeah, me too, Howie sighed. It's crazy. Here we are trying to save our class from total destruction by a mad woman and nobody will believe us. I guess we're just going to have to depend on ourselves, Melody said. I just hope we'll be a match for Mrs. Jeepers, said Howie. Me too, Melody said softly. The next morning, Howie and Melody were the first to meet under the big oak tree. Howie pulled out a large book from his book bag. Look what I got from the library last night. Howie held up a book called Vampires and Witches, The True Story. Did you find anything out? Melody asked. I stayed up late and read the whole section on vampires. I found out what we need to do to protect ourselves and if Mrs. Jeepers really is some kind of vampire, Howie said. What do we need to do? Melody took the book and started flipping through it. Howie spoke spoke with authority. There are a couple of things vampires can't stand. One is a cross. Howie pulled open his jacket to reveal a huge gold cross necklace that hung around his neck. Another thing they don't like is garlic, he continued. Melody's eyes grew wide. Did you bring some garlic too? We didn't have any real garlic at home, so I brought this. Howie held up a small plastic bottle labeled garlic salt. We didn't have... Do you think that'll work? Melody asked. Well, it's worth a try. We'll go with it. Will you go with me and sprinkle it around the classroom? Howie asked as he gathered up his stuff. Me? Melody squealed. Why don't we wait for somebody else to come and help? Because if we wait too long, Mrs. Jeepers will be here, Howie said impatiently, and if we don't do it today, she might turn Eddie into a frog or hypnotize him forever. I guess you're right, Melody agreed reluctantly. Eddie wasn't exactly her favorite person, but she still didn't want anything bad to happen to him. They tiptoed into the school and held their breath as they opened the classroom door. Good, she's not here yet. Here they are planning the garlic powder. Howie whispered. Without another word, he started sprinkling the garlic salt all around the room, especially around Eddie's desk. He had used every last drop when the door of the classroom opened suddenly. In walked Mrs. Jeepers. Good morning, children, Mrs. Jeepers smiled. This is quite a surprise. What are you doing here so early? Howie quickly slipped the empty bottle of garlic salt into his pocket and answered, we thought we might be able to help you with something. Melody quickly added, yeah, we wanted to help you pick up paper and straighten your books and stuff. Mrs. Jeepers rubbed her brooch softly. Why? How very thoughtful of you. You can get started right away. Melody and Howie exchanged a look of relief and started cleaning the room. Chapter 12. Kerchoo is the name of Chapter 12. As soon as Eddie arrived, trouble began. Phew, something stinks, he yelled. Who had spaghetti for breakfast? Howie and Melody gestured to Eddie to be quiet, but he ignored them. Instead, he skipped to the back of the room and dumped the contents of his book bag. At least 20 paper airplanes floated into the floor, and as the rest of the kids entered, Eddie took aim. Paper planes soared dizzily through the room and then drifted to the floor. Mrs. Jeepers was too busy blowing her nose to notice Eddie's plans. But as soon as the class figured out what Eddie was doing, they wadded up his planes into tight balls and tossed them into the garbage. Hey, what are you doing? What are you guys doing? Eddie complained. Several children glared at Eddie and hissed, "Shh, Eddie." They all went to their seats, sat up straight, and gave Mrs. Jeepers their full attention. But not Eddie. He took all the books off the shelves and scattered them on the floor. He didn't notice that Mrs. Jeepers had gone into the sneezing fit. "Kerchoo, kerchoo, kerchoo," she wheezed. "Excuse me, class. Something seems to be making me sneeze. Kerchoo, kerchoo." Mrs. Jeepers pulled a tissue from her box on her desk and blew her nose. Her eyes were red and tears crept from the corners. Liza waved her hand in the air. "When I have an allergy attack, my mother does major house cleaning," she said, as she says it's the dust and the cat hair that makes me sneeze. Maybe I should go get the custodian. Melody leaned over and pinched Liza, but she sat back up when she noticed Mrs. Jeepers looking her way. "Kerchoo," Mrs. Jeepers said. Then she shook her head. "That won't be necessary, Liza. I believe I know what's making me sneeze. There's only one thing it could be. I just cannot imagine how garlic has gotten into this room." Howie sucked in his breath real fast while Melody started digging through the books in her desk. Neither one noticed how Mrs. Jeepers' teary eyes were glowing green. Meanwhile, Eddie... Sorry. The dog snuck in. Meanwhile, Eddie had stopped taking the books off the shelves. He glanced at Mrs. Jeepers and watched while she blew her nose again. Her allergy was interfering with his pranks. As far as he could tell, Mrs. Jeepers wasn't even able to see him through her tissues. Eddie stepped over the books onto the floor and headed for the desk. He pulled a few pigtails and pinched a few ears on his way. He stretched and pretended to yawn before slumping into his desk. "So are you sick or something?" he hollered. "Sick people shouldn't come to school. You're exposing us to all your cootie germs." Howie covered his eyes and Liza gasped, but Mrs. Jeepers acted as if she hadn't heard a thing. She turned and began to write the morning assignment on the board. She had to stop every so often to sneeze, but soon the board was full and the class got busy. Eddie looked around with disgust. The room was so quiet that he could hear pencils scratching on paper. The only other sound was Mrs. Jeepers' sniffles. By lunchtime, Eddie had already sharpened all the pencils and a few of his friends' crayons until they were nubs. He had dumped the entire contents of his desk on the floor and kicked them halfway across the room. He had hummed, whistled, burped until his mouth hurt, but Mrs. Jeepers was too busy blowing her nose to pay attention to him at all. As he followed the rest of the class to the cafeteria, he made his brain work double time, trying to think of ways to make her notice him and drive her crazy. Eddie got his lunch tray and sat next to Howie and Melody. "What's wrong, everybody? Don't tell me you're turning into super students. I've been trying all day to drive Mrs. Jeepers batty." "You guys haven't helped me one bit." Melody sadly shook her head. "Eddie, can't you get through your thick skull? Mrs. Jeepers not ordinary. She's some kind of vampire witch. If you're not careful, she might turn you into a frog." Eddie giggled hysterically. "You've been watching way too much TV. There are no such thing as vampires or witches." "Well, if that's true, then tell me why Mrs. Jeepers can't stand the garlic I sprinkled all around the room," Howie asked. "According to the book I got from the library, vampires are repulsed by garlic." "Well, I think garlic is repulsive and I'm not a vampire, so that doesn't prove anything," Eddie snapped. "But I do know that this teacher has got to go. So far she's made us clean up the room, get our work done, and be quiet in class. Before you know it, she'll have us actually learning. We've got to do something about her, and fast. And if you're not going to help me, I'll just have to get rid of her myself." Melody shook her head and pushed her tray away. "All of a sudden, I'm not too hungry," she moaned. "Me neither," agreed Howie, "but I'm scared." Chapter 13. I have had enough. Eddie rushed into the room, ready to cause more trouble. He bumped into the custodian, who was just leaving. "Thank you for sweeping the room, Mr. Dobson. I am sure I'll feel much better now," Mrs. Jeepers said. Melody and Howie gave each other a worried look and then went to their seats. Howie leaned over Eddie's chair to whisper, "I've got something to tell you." "Don't bug me. I'm getting ready to bombard Mrs. Jeepers with spitballs." "But you can't," Howie hissed. "The garlic's gone. Mrs. Jeepers is feeling better. It was true. Mrs. Jeepers was no longer blowing her nose or sneezing. Her nose was still a little red, but her green eyes were back to normal. But Eddie was too bent on causing trouble to notice. He stuck a wad of paper in his mouth and got it good and soggy. With his tongue, he rolled it into a small ball. Then, taking careful aim, he let it fly. Splat! It landed right in the middle of Mrs. Jeepers' desk. Bingo! Eddie grinned. Mrs. Jeepers slowly plucked the spitball from her papers. Her green eyes flashed as she calmly stood from her chair. She started to open her mouth to speak when splat! Another spitball whizzed by her cheek and landed on the blackboard. Eddie smiled as though he had just won the World Series. He leaned over to Howie and bragged, "See, she's a wimp. She won't do a thing." Howie didn't answer. He was too busy staring at Mrs. Jeepers. The class was so quiet that when she started speaking in the low voice, it sounded as if it was booming. "I have had enough." Her green eyes flashed and her brooch glowed, and she deliberately made her way to Eddie. With a trembling hand, she grabbed his arm. "Come with me," Mrs. Jeepers demanded. Eddie whimpered, I'm so sorry, Mrs. Jeepers. I'll never do it again." Mrs. Jeepers pulled Eddie from his desk and said very quietly, "I will speak with you in the hall this instant." Everyone watched as Eddie was led into the hall. The door closed with a thud. "What do you think's going to happen to him?" Melody whispered. "I don't know," Howie gasped, "but I'm glad it's not me." All the kids slowly nodded their heads. One by one, the whole class started picking the stuff up off the floor. While they were at it, they cleaned the blackboards and then sat down at their desk and hurried to finish all of their work. They all looked up when the door creaked open. Mrs. Jeepers was back to normal, but Eddie looked as white as a ghost. There he is. The students met under the oak tree after school. Melody was the first to speak. "What did she do to you, Eddie?" "It must have been awful," Howie exclaimed. "You hardly said a word for the rest of the day." Eddie shook his head, but he didn't speak. Liza piped up. "You can tell us. Did she grow fangs and bite you on the neck?" "Don't be stupid," Howie snapped. "She didn't bite him, did she?" As he looked at Eddie, all eyes now turned to Eddie. With a shudder, he started to speak hoarsely. "I'll only say this. You guys were right. Mrs. Jeepers is no ordinary teacher." "Is she a vampire?" Liza asked. Howie grabbed Eddie's arm. "Come on, you can tell us. You can level with us." But Eddie wouldn't let them tell them what happened. All he said is, "I know one thing. I'll never make her mad again." For the rest of the year, Eddie kept his promise. As a matter of fact, nobody in the third grade at Bale Elementary School ever dared to make Mrs. Jeepers mad, and her green brooch never glowed again, although she wore it every day. On the last day of school, the kids met under the oak tree. "I can't believe the year's over," Liza said. "I can't believe we lived through it," Eddie moaned. "But you know," Melody said, "Mrs. Jeepers wasn't so bad." Howie said, "She's really not that weird." Melody laughed. "I can't believe we ever thought she was a vampire." "After all," Liza agreed, "vampires don't wear polka dots." That's it for that book. We're all done with that. Remember to check your email for your work, and I will see you guys tomorrow. Have a great day. Bye.